Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pro Wrestling Inside and Out live right here on Facebook and YouTube. On this program, we are going to talk about Georgia Championship Wrestling Superstars. It was a short-lived promotion that Ole Anderson and Jerry Jarrett were involved in. Now, it only lasted about 2 months, and we'll get into why it only lasted 2 months. But what had happened was Georgia Championship Wrestling was running Ohio, West Virginia, and Virginia, and they were really not running the Georgia towns. So Ole decided he wanted a local group. He contacted Jerry Jarrett. Jerry Jarrett approved that he would do that. He said, yes, I'll do it. I'll run Georgia. He brought in Bill Dundee as the booker. My father, which was working in the Mid-Atlantic territory, he came in, and he was the assistant booker. He also took care of the towns. Now, here's the people. Jerry Jarrett, Ole Anderson, Bill Dundee, and Ronnie West, they were the company of Georgia Championship Wrestling Superstars. And with that, let me introduce right now our guest for this program, Michael St. John and Jack Lord. Welcome to Pro Wrestling Inside Out Live.
Thank you, Brett. It's great to be here. Good to see you. You're looking great. And Jack, always a pleasure seeing you, my man. Jack and I go back a long way.
Yeah, thanks for the kind words, Mike. Always great to be with you guys.
Well, thank you very much, and I enjoy the opportunity. And again, Brett, for you, it's great. You and I go back a long way, and your father was one of my favorite people in the wrestling business of all time. I started while your father was working for Nick Gulas and was our referee, and oh my God, I learned so much from your father, and what a wonderful, wonderful man, and God rest his soul. I know that he's refereeing a match tonight somewhere in heaven.
Yes, he is. And he would love to be a part of this, going back and talking about the history of professional wrestling. Mike, who contacted you about being on the Georgia Championship Wrestling Superstars?
Well, Jerry Jarrett, it was unique that the fact that Jerry Jarrett had just bought out Nick Gulas in Nashville and had bought out the territory. You know, a little known fact was Jerry the King Lawler came to me. I was programming WMPS radio in Memphis, Tennessee. And Jerry came to me, and we had Jerry on the air. Ron Jordan was my afternoon talent, and Jerry and Ron are friends. So Jerry came on Ron's show, and we got to talking, and Jerry got the fact that my interest was doing play-by-play and doing some commentary. And he asked me if I would like to do a wrestling taping with them. And I actually did the first ever wrestling taping for the new NWA in Memphis for Jerry Jarrett Promotions with Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler at the Cook Convention Center in March of 1977. And I did 4 shows for them. And then they hired Lance Russell away from Channel 13 TV, who I knew not only from the wrestling business, but from the broadcast business as well. I was a program director on the radio side, he on the TV side. And so we knew each other by then, but they brought him over as a full-time wrestling announcer. So my job was preempted. Well, I get to Nashville. I go to work for Nick Gulas. Your dad, Ronnie West, was refereeing for Nick and working and doing some of the booking as well back then. And Jerry Jarrett, when he took over the territory, knew that I had helped them out in Memphis. So I sort of became the third announcer for Jarrett and Jerry Lawler, living in Hendersonville, living literally about 3 blocks away from Jerry Jarrett. My house and his house on Bonita Parkway were about 3 blocks away. Of course, he had a great house. I had a little house. And so I started doing some things at his house and then at TV on Wednesday nights in Nashville. And then he came to me, called me, and asked me to come to his house one day. And he said that he was going to do a promotion in cooperation with Georgia Championship Wrestling out of Chattanooga. It would be a live show on Channel TV, I think it is. And so that's how I got involved. And I was excited about it because Bill Dundee, who I'd worked with, and Bill, one of the best and smartest bookers ever was in my estimation in the wrestling business. And it was just an exciting opportunity. And I said, yes, let's do it. And that's how it came to be.
Now, did you when you came there, Did you know that the partnership with Ole Anderson, that Ole was going to be in charge? Not really Jarrett, but Ole Anderson was going to be in charge of it?
I did, and I was made aware of that early on, and they even booked me on Georgia Championship Wrestling at the old studios on Techwood Drive at 100 Techwood Drive, and I'd always watched Georgia Championship Wrestling and grew up on it, and having the opportunity to meet Gordon Soley and be on the show, they brought me in and actually did an interview and did a segment about this marriage, if you would, and about being based out of Chattanooga, and actually called a match with Gordon Soley, which of course Gordon was awesome and I was awful. And at the end of the show, got to talk to Gordon, and he needed a ride to the airport. And I actually had my Winnebago in town. We were on our way to Florida and for a family vacation. So I took him to the airport in our Winnebago and got to know him. And again, a fabulous man in our business.
Well, the first show happened on June 11th, 1983. It was at the WRCB TV studios in Chattanooga. And this was the card. There was only about 20 people in this actual building at the studios because Ole had forgot to advertise it the week before that there's going to be a TV taping live that night. So it was only about 20 people. I can remember my dad trying to change the curtains, and every time he'd pull one curtain, the other curtain would move. He finally gave up. But there's only 20 people. But this was the card. The Fantastic Ones, Bobby Fulton and Terry Taylor versus Rick Klein and the Masked Sting, which I don't remember who the Masked Sting was. Bill Dundee beat Pat Rose on there. The French Angel and Jerry Novak with Jim Cornette beat Ken Woodby and the Stray Cat. Ray Candy and Steve-O beat Larry Hare and Bill Rose. Talking about the Fantastic Ones, what did you think about them? Jack, did you get to see any of the tapes and stuff of the Fantastic Ones?
You know, honestly, I was stationed in Germany during this whole run of this. So everything that I know about it is just simply from notes and catching up on stuff. I think I saw some YouTube stuff. I thought they were really good. I mean, you know, wasn't Terry supposed to be an original tag team partner there anyway?
Yes, he was supposed to be the original Fabulous One, but Jarrett felt like he was actually too good looking for that role. so he finally found Stan Lane, and they put them as the Fabulous Ones. But they were supposed to be together, and they actually, when they came in, and I think if I remember this, Michael, didn't they do the same exact videos that they had done with the Fabulous Ones?
They sure did. And being in Nashville, and of course being part of that, I saw that. But they mimicked the Fabulous Ones. The Fantastics were the Fabulous Ones .2, as we would say in the world today. And so as a result, and you know, working with Bobby, they were smaller. When Stan Lane and Steve Kern worked together, they weren't big men, but they had a little finesse about the size. They were a little bit bigger. The Fabulous Ones looked more husky, I guess you might say, whereas the Fantastics were a little smaller, very much in the Bill Dundee vein of quick, fast guys that worked in a hurry, and they were Tommy and Bobby made a heck of a team.
Yeah, they were good. Terry Taylor did. You know, I think that the thing about them is they were going against the Angel and Jerry Novak, Frank Morrell and the Bounty Hunter, when Cornette was their manager. And I think that was going to be, if the people later on in the show, I will share a little bit of who was going to be Terry Taylor's and Bobby Fulton's next opponents if they would have stayed in business. And I think once they got to these guys, they would have been going to be big business in the Georgia territory.
You know, one of the best things that I think happened to me out of working that area was I got to meet Jimmy Cornette, and I had seen Jimmy in Nashville taking pictures. He was a photographer, and he'd be around the ring, and got to talking to him. And then the next thing I know, I'm interviewing him on TV, and he's a manager. And gosh, you know, what is Jimmy's career? Jimmy is, I think, outsmarted everybody and got in on the front end of the podcast era, and he's got a tremendous following.
Oh yes, but boy, he can cause some grief.
You know, he sort of did that back then, if I remember correctly.
Yes, he did that in 1983. I can remember that very well. Jack, do you have the card for the Memorial Auditorium, the June 11th card?
June 11th. Yeah, we started off Bill Dundee versus Dutch Mantell, Ronnie Garvin versus the Iron Sheik, Larry Hare and Bill Rose versus the Fantastic Ones, Brett Wayne versus Norman Frederick Charles III with Jim Cornette. Rick Rude and Joe Lightfoot versus the French Angel and the Bounty Hunter with Jim Cornette. King Carl Fergie with Jim Cornette versus the Stray Cat. This was the first week in the Georgia Towns, and the only major difference would Bill Dundee would wrestle against Steve-O.
Oh, Steve-O and Bill Dundee had some great matches. And, you know, and everybody talks about that era that the crowds wasn't that great, and they really wasn't magnificent. But Marietta, Georgia, Steve-O and Bill Dundee built that town, and the last week we were there was about 1,400 people there, and they made the announcement. I can't remember the guy's name, but he made the announcement and said, hey, next week the big stars are coming back, the Road Warriors, and the people actually booed. They really wanted to see Bill Dundee because they were entertaining. Now, for that little 2 months, them guys worked very hard to entertain the people. So, but Steve-O was very good. Did Steve-O help you with the commentary on the show?
Steve actually did a couple of times and was very proficient. And I always thought that as color commentators or professional wrestlers that join an announcer to be because I'm not a wrestler, I'm an announcer, and it added a lot to it. And Steve was a very, very smart fellow, and I always thought that he had a career once he stepped out of the ring. If he wanted to step behind the microphone, that he'd do a great job. But he was very, very astute.
Well, let's talk about Jim Cornette just for a moment, because Jim Cornette, you know, he actually managed almost half of the wrestlers that was on the card. King Carl Fergie, Jerry Novak, Norman Frederick Charles III, and King Carl Fergie. And that was almost half of the time, because I think there was only 7 heels on it, and there were 7 baby faces that were full-time wrestlers. So he actually took her. What did you think? Cornette was a man that was able to really generate a lot of heat in a very short time that he was working for Georgia Championship Wrestling Superstars.
Jimmy Cornette never met a man he didn't hate. I mean, let's be honest with it. You know, and it was funny because I can remember a comment that Bill Dundee, and you know, he said, "Man, you've got more. You're on TV more than anybody else. You know, you're dominating the show." And he's a very, he's a very dominating personality, and that's okay. But the thing that Cornette brought was a levity, but a seriousness, and that's the great thing about Jimmy. Jimmy can be funny as heck, and then 5 seconds later, hit somebody with a tennis racket, and he probably does that as well as anybody has ever done it in this business, in my opinion.
Yep.
Yeah, Jimmy was really good. That was his rookie year that year, and I really enjoyed seeing Jimmy Cornette, and I knew from that moment he was going to be a huge manager in the wrestling business. Jack, did you get to see any of his stuff even prior to it in Memphis before he came to Georgia Championship Wrestling?
You know, I've watched a lot of YouTube stuff with him on there, and I'll just say this: from the get-go, Jimmy was really good. And I think just, as any of us, over time, you just get better. I can't imagine anybody being a better manager or mouthpiece than what Jimmy wound up being.
Oh, he was great. You know, when we came back on June 18th, 1983. The TV production improved drastically. There was more than 30 people in the building. There was actually probably about 100 and maybe 125 people. And it was a whole lot better. My dad took the ring and kind of catty cornered it, but we had a lot of people in there, and it vastly improved over, and there were people there. Jack, what was the next card, June 18th? Do you have that card?
Yeah, that's Bill Dundee beat Dutch Mantell. Carl Fergie and Norman Frederick Charles III beat the Fantastic Ones. The Stray Cat beat Larry Hare. French Angel and the Bounty Hunter beat Ray Candy and Joe Lightfoot. Joe Lightfoot was subbing for Gerald Finley. And Steve-O beat Bill Rose.
Hey, what we're talking about, did anybody ever know what happened to Gerald Finley? He just disappeared.
Gosh. Yeah, I haven't heard from him in years.
Hey, he was very good. I always liked Gerald Finley. What we're talking about, we got to talk about Dirty Dutch Mantell. You know, Bill Dundee told back then, the only office people were actually my dad and Bill Dundee. That was it. There was no other office personnel but those two people. And so they would do the actual booking at the Falcons. I think it was the Falcons Rest in Atlanta, Georgia. It was actually in Riverdale, Georgia. And I remember Bill said, I'm bringing Dutch in. I'm going to have Dutch there because Dutch knows how to build the town. And with me and him, we should be able to build. And you know what? He was right. Dutch did know how to. He was by that time he was seasoned, and he really knew how to bring the people back. Because the first week it started out, had about 300 people. The next week it came back, and it had about 500 people. So each week it was building momentum. What did you think about Dirty Dutch Mantell, Michael St. John?
You know, I got to watch a great series of matches that I think a lot of people will remember from back in the early 70s when Nick Gulas was booking. He booked Dutch and Randy Savage against each other for it seemed like a year. And they didn't have wrestling matches. They just got into each other's face and fought like dogs. And every week it would be a screw job on this guy, or this guy'd get beat by counted out, or this guy would get injured and they'd stop the match. But it just went on forever and ever. And it built, the people built, and the people built, and the people built. And I forget what the blow off was, but I always respected the athletic ability of both men. But Randy Savage was a true athlete, without a doubt. Dutch Mantell, I call a brainiac, because Dutch Mantell is a brilliant person, and he could give a great interview. He'd record a great promo, but he could think. And he not only thought and would give tips to me of how to say or how to build up or whatever, but he would help other wrestlers as well. And I've had some people tell me that Dutch doesn't like me. I have no idea why not, because I think Dutch is fantastic. But and he's obviously done very, very well with his national TV exposure with the dark side of the ring and all that stuff. But I just really felt that was bringing Dutch in was a stroke of genius, because I think you're absolutely right, Jack and Brett, because Dutch could build a town, and he was so smart. And and the other thing I always loved about Dutch is Dutch always thought, in my opinion, 2 steps ahead. So he not only was thinking about what was going to happen today or with the matches tonight, he was thinking about what they were going to do next week and the week after and probably beyond. And I think that's a secret to his success.
Yeah, I think that they actually did bring in Dutch Mantell in. I think it was a very smart move. And like I said, you could tell they knew what they were going to do to build to the next week. And there's no doubt Dutch Mantell, one of the greatest wrestlers that's ever been in the ring. And when you put him and Bill Dundee together, they're going to have some great matches.
Brad, if I can add something here, you were talking about the studio. One of the funny things about this whole thing, and Jack, you'll appreciate this, is every week I would get to the studio, and I'd get there 2.5 hours before the show for the meetings and everything, and the ring would be set up. And one week it would look like Memphis. The curtains would be very, bland curtains, and the ring was the centerpiece, and the light over the ring, and it would look just like the Memphis studio. The next week you get there and you got all the bells and whistles of Georgia Championship Wrestling all in. And it went on. One week it was like Jarrett did the set, and the next week Ole did the set. And it went on. There was not a consistent, if you look back at the tapes, there's not a consistent set in that.
And they also changed from the beginning. If you remember, it was called World Championship Wrestling presents Georgia Championship Wrestling Superstars. And they had the big banner up there. And then they opened up. Ole actually had an opening done, but Jarrett didn't like that opening. So he decided he was going to use his own. It changed from Georgia Championship Wrestling Superstars just to Championship Wrestling. Now, at some point, it may have changed back, but because it was funny. I did not, and this is a question that I think needs to be asked. Did Ole and Jarrett really think they could work together? I mean, do you think they thought they could?
I think in the beginning, I think they were thinking this can work. And I think it was to the benefit of both, because you got to remember when Jarrett bought out or got Nick Gulas out of the business, bought him out of the business, they were running Chattanooga, and they were ready to shut down Chattanooga because it was sort of out of the footprint of their travel of the boys. And so it was sort of planned that it was either going to go to Knoxville or to the Knoxville folks, or it was going to go to Georgia. And Atlanta was only an hour 20, hour and a half down the road. So it made sense for Atlanta. And I think it was a way for Jerry to maintain a presence with the promotion that he had bought from Nick Gulas in Chattanooga, as well as bringing the quality of the athletic prowess in the ring up a notch or two.
Well, it's funny because when Jarrett called my dad in Mid-Atlantic, while Dory Funk Jr. was the booker at the time, so he was helping Dory Funk Jr. in Mid-Atlantic. He called him. He said, "Well, I'm going to do a joint venture with Ole Anderson." And Dad said, "Well, I just got fired from Ole Anderson." He had fired him in March of '83. Him and Les Thatcher got fired the same exact day. But he said, "Do you really think," he told Jarrett, "do you really think that you're going to work with him?" Because this is what he'd always say, because Dad would come up with finishes. It was Dad's ideal to beat Dusty Rhodes up in the parking lot. And it took him forever to get him to do that. He said, "I can't believe you're going to do that Tennessee crap." That's what he'd always say. Anything he came up with, Buzz Sawyer and Tommy Ridge out in the parking lot, he got so mad at Dad. "That was Tennessee crap. Don't do that." So he said, "You really think it's going to last?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I think it'll do well." Jack, an Ole Anderson, and you talked to him a few times.
Yeah.
What would you have thought when they said, "Okay, they're going to be a partnership going on"?
I don't see how anybody was a partner with Ole. Now saying that, I have immense respect for Ole. To me, he is my favorite booker of all time. But knowing what I do know about him, what I've heard about him and everything, Ole was a one-man show. Everybody else just, followed along and manned the ship, but he was the captain.
Oh, yeah. And the thing about Ole, too, is Ole was a rough guy, but Ole was also a nice person when he wanted to be.
He was. He certainly was.
My favorite, I only met Ole twice. One at Georgia Championship Wrestling the day I was down to do the thing for the promotion of this particular show. And then the second time, it was in Cleveland, Tennessee. And Brett, I think it was a thing. You were up there, the gentleman that owns the radio station up in Cleveland and the low power TV and all. We did a show about 5 or 6 years ago with Bill Dundee, may have been 7 years ago. And Bill was there. And Bill told me, he said, "I want you to come up and do this and do the commentary. And your partner's going to be Ole Anderson." And I went, "Oh." And he said, "No, Ole." But anyway, I got introduced to Ole like 15 minutes before we went on, and Ole was his wife was assisting him, and we got to talking, and we got to not really know each other a lot before the matches started, but between the matches or during the intermission, he wanted a water, and I went and got him a water, or whatever. We started talking, and then by the end of the night, I ended up spending an extra 45 minutes up there talking to Ole because we sort of bonded. And 2 days later, I got a copy of his book in the mail. And he said, "It was great working with you. You're a real pro." It's autographed, Ole Anderson. And it just took me by total surprise. But, Jack, I have to agree with you. When he wanted it, and whatever it was that we sort of bonded together over, I'm proud to say it, but I agree with you. One heck of a booker. When you look at the things he came up with on his own, sheer genius.
I am not ashamed to say that I still book shows and I reuse a majority of his ideas. I tweak them a little bit, but you can't do much better than what he did. It was just great stuff.
I want to say hello to Quentin Ward. Thank you so much for being part of the show. Let's talk next. I believe, Jack, you have that the next TV taping, which it might not have been the next TV, but July 2nd. You have that TV?
Right, yeah. Carl Fergie and Norman Frederick Charles III beat Pat Rose and Ken Hall. The Fantastic Ones beat Rick Connors and Sam the Samoan. French Angel and the Bounty Hunter beat Pat Rose and Steve-O. Brett Wayne double count out with the Stray Cat. Bill Dundee beat Gene Spurlock. That was the TV tapings. Now, the card that night was Dutch Mantell beat Bill Dundee in a bullwhip match. Terry Taylor and Bobby Fulton beat Norman Frederick Charles III and Carl Fergie. The Stray Cat beat Larry Hare. The French Angel and Bounty Hunter beat Brett Wayne and Pat Rose, and Steve-O beat Bill Rose.
Let's talk a little bit about the French Angel and the Bounty Hunter. The Bounty Hunter, Jerry Novak, was a huge star in the 70s. Him and David Novak, the Bounty Hunters, drew a lot of money with Jim Kent. When he came back this time, he was with Frank Morrell, the French Angel. Those two guys truly put Terry Taylor, and if anybody got to see these matches, they really put Terry Taylor and Bobby Fulton through the hard school of knocks, so to speak, because they had some great matches with those guys.
You know, Jerry Novak, the first time I ever worked with him was in Nashville, and he was a very, very imposing figure. And he was very quiet in the locker room. And the one thing I remember was getting to call his action in the ring, and there was just a little something different. And Jackie, as a promoter and a booker, you understand this. Jerry would put those punches in a little bit harder, and Jerry would put his knees a little bit harder, and would put those slams a little bit faster. The beauty of it was being able to watch a gentleman who was a prime in his profession. I mean, he had mastered his profession, and he taught a lot of boys, I think, learned, like you just said, Brett, from the hard knocks from working with Jerry Novak, because I don't think a young wrestler came out of the ring after wrestling in a match with Jerry Novak, whether it be singles or tag team, without some respect for what he did and how he did it, and learning from how he did it.
Yeah, I agree. He was there was no. Now, you had already talked about, you had worked with Bill Dundee prior to this to the show.
Yes. Bill had actually worked for Nick, and also had worked with Jerry when they first broke off in Memphis. And again, I was in Memphis in 77 when that all happened. And I'll tell you, Bill Dundee, if there is ever an underrated superstar in this business, both in behind the scenes and in the ring. And I know Bill Dundee was he's a small person like myself, but boy, you talk about when it comes to talent, when it comes to being able to he could stand with the giants. He's a giant in his own right, without a doubt. And I think he's one of the most underrated wrestlers in the history of professional wrestling in our era.
Yeah, I'll echo that.
You know, when I did a top 100 list, and I added Bill Dundee as one of the top, I would think one of the top 100 wrestlers of all time. And a lot of people, they didn't get to see him wrestle. They don't really understand that, because, you know, some people remember him as Sir William, but the Bill Dundee from 1975, when he got to Tennessee, and those matches he had with Jerry Lawler, he deserves to be. If there's a Hall of Fame, he needs to be in that Hall of Fame. There's no doubt.
Yep.
I agree. I totally agree. And another thing too is I don't think a lot of people realize when he worked for Bill Watts and booked for Bill Watts, what a job he did there in New Orleans, for what he did with that New Orleans territory. I mean, the New Orleans territory was always good, as I understand it, but it was always sort of, there's a lot to do in New Orleans besides go to a professional wrestling match. But he set that whole area, that whole Arcadia area down in Baton Rouge and Alexandria and Lafayette and New Orleans and Jackson, Mississippi. He set that on fire with his booking, and that's a testament to him as well.
Yes, that's the biggest year Bill Watts ever had, was in 1984, and probably maybe a couple of months from now, we're going to talk about that whole year, because that year was incredible for Bill Watts, and the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express set records there. They didn't beat Michael Hayes and the Junkyard Dog record, but they did come very close to it. All right, the next thing I think we need to talk about, what was the next card? July 16th.
July 16th, yeah. The TV tapings were the Fantastic Ones beat Pat Rose and Ken Hall. Stagger Lee, who was Coco Beware, beat Deke Rivers. I talked to Deke last year, as a matter of fact. Carl Fergie and Norman Frederick Charles III beat David Jones and Jeff Young. Bill Dundee beat Joe Lightfoot. Then the card that night was Joe Lightfoot beat Bill Rose. Steve-O beat Pat Rose. The Fantastic Ones beat the Angel and the Bounty Hunter. Stagger Lee beat Bill Dundee by DQ. Brett Wayne and Stray Cat beat Carl Fergie and Norman Frederick Charles in a no DQ, no time limit match.
You know, Stagger Lee came in as the Southern Heavyweight Champion. Do you remember that, Michael?
I do. And Coco, let me tell you, he was one of the most impressive people that came in that whole period of time, in my opinion. And just watching him and looking at his raw talent, you just knew that good things were coming.
Yeah, Stagger Lee was very good. Bill Dundee and Stagger Lee really had better matches than Dutch Mantell. And I'll tell you a funny story. my dad was refereeing the matches at the Memorial Auditorium, and they had done something with the Southern title, and Bill had the Southern title, and he was up at the stage, and this was all ad lib. They didn't talk about it, they didn't figure it out. And Dad went to the stage and grabbed a hold of the belt and said, "No, it's not your belt. You didn't win this belt." And Bill said, "Take a bump off the stage." Dad just kind of, he said, "What?" Before he could say what, Bill made that turn and came with that big hit he got and pushed him off the stage into the back rows. He was sitting. Dad comes back. He's sitting in the dressing room, and he's pulling down. He's got bruises on his back of his legs on the thing. And I came back there and I said, "Man, what a bump." He said, "I didn't want to take that bump. He made me take that." That's the kind of person Bill was, though. He didn't care because he would have took the bump. So he was going to make him take it too. It wasn't, he called it and he did it. So Bill was really great. All right. The last show was July 30th, 1983. And the reason it was the last show, I'm not for certain, but Michael, you might remember this or not, was the party for Fifi, Jim Cornette, was it done the week prior? I think
the week prior, and Cornette took the cake in the face at ringside, and that was, oh my gosh, that was one of the most clever angles at that day and time that anybody around had seen. And then they did the deal where they blinded Bobby Fulton, and Terry Taylor is trying to help Bobby Fulton, and the camera angle made it look like, and to this day, it's one of the people will show it as I guess a goof film, but it's Terry Taylor trying to help Bobby Fulton, who's over the table where I'm doing the commentary, and I'm blind, and it looks like Terry Taylor, to help him, is engaging in some kind of sexual activity that we don't talk about on radio, but on a podcast, I guess. But it looked like that Terry was, anyway. It's and I'm sitting there with this look on my face, like, oh my God, they're not really doing this, and it makes it even worse. But yeah, that was, and it was a sad day for everybody because we didn't know it was going to be the last show, obviously. But after it was over with, we sort of got a hankering or got a feel that we may not be doing this anymore, and it was unfortunate because I think from an audience standpoint, and from an acceptability standpoint in the marketplace, and we had some TV coverage, and we had some newspapers talking about it, and one of the radio stations, I think 101 point, the country station there, was doing some things and promoting and talking about it. There was some buzz, and it got shot down on the growth. Normally you get shot down on the backside of the wave. Well, the wave was still forming when it got blown up.
Yeah, he really only cut it off. And I remember my dad coming back and said, "Well, he cut it off." He said, "No more." And he got so upset, even though we thought the Fifi party was magnificent, because the actual dog was our dog, and so they did the Fifi party with the Cornette, and I thought it was great. Everybody thought it was great except for Ole Anderson. Yeah. Ole did not find the humor in it and did not like it. But he did. I don't think he understood that it wasn't to be a joke. It was to show that Jim Cornette was this arrogant and to build the heat on Cornette. I don't know that he got that part of it. But there was other things too. They went to the Omni. The Fantastic Ones, Terry Taylor and Bobby Fulton, were going against the Road Warriors. Bill Dundee told the Fantastics, "Do not get beat by the Road Warriors." Mm-hmm. Well, now you go to Ole Anderson and tell him you're not going to get beat, and Bill Dundee told you not to get beat. Well, there's going to be some problems, So, and then when he finally cut it off, I thought, the building process of this would have been really good because Larry Hare and Bill Rose were leaving. They already got their notice. Norman Charles had got his notice. Adrian Street came in to take his place. And the Bruise Brothers, Porkchop Cash and Troy Graham, were on their way. And they were going to take the Larry Hare bill, and they were going to bring different guys in them for them to wrestle and for about 3 months. And then after that, they were going to get the Fantastic Ones. There were going to be some money when they finally put those two teams together. So and plus they were bringing in Jerry Lawler to go against Carl Fergie. the Battle of the Kings, which we know how that was going to end. So, Jerry Lawler certainly wasn't going down.
Carl Fergie is a cousin of Jerry Lawler. Is he not kin to Jerry Lawler? I know Wayne Ferris is, but
he is.
Like there's a relation, there's a kinship there. The one thing that, getting back to Ole, and I think to give Ole his due, is Ole is a classic Greco-Roman. You get in the ring and it's mano on mano and it's wrestling. And I would think that Ole probably despises what the WWE does today. I don't know that for a fact, and I don't want to talk for Ole Anderson, but I get the feeling that he probably would not like the style that it has gone that direction, because Ole, I got the feel, to me, Ole, a great match for Ole Anderson would be Ric Flair against Vern Gagne. To me, in the ring, get the introductions done, and let's wrestle. And I think that Ole just really didn't like a lot that helped shape the angles on the card.
Yeah, I don't, because Ole just wanted wrestling. And you think about it, he really didn't. When when they did the Buzz Sawyer Tommy Rich angle, which they eventually did, what was the last match Buzz Sawyer and Tommy Rich had? It was inside of a cage, but they called it something. Do you remember, Jack?
The last Battle of Atlanta.
They had the last Battle of Atlanta. Well, when it was started in Chattanooga, that actual angle was started in Chattanooga, and Ole hated it. I mean, he hated every bit of it because Dad tarred and feathered Tommy Rich. I mean, they did all the Tennessee stuff. Well, he didn't like it. Nothing about it did he like. So, he wanted strictly wrestling. And sometimes in the Chattanooga area, especially Chattanooga, then people weren't used to seeing just wrestling. They were used to seeing Nick Gulas and what he would produce. And I'm not saying what Nick Gulas produced, but Georgia and Tennessee was completely different. It was a completely different. And Ole had done the booking from, I believe, 1976 until right before 1984 or 85, when it was the last show he did.
Well, growing up in Alabama and watching Tennessee, the reason I got into wrestling was I grew up here in Huntsville, Alabama. And I grew up when cable TV, Huntsville didn't have any TV stations per se. They had one low power station, and it had wrestling on it on Saturday afternoon with Grady Reeves. And Grady and my mom were good friends, and my dad. But anyway, we had cable TV in our house, but cable TV was exactly what it said. It was a cable coming through the window that you hooked to the back of the TV, normally on a little Y connector, and you hooked it on the back where the antenna would go. And you picked up channel 2, channel 3, channel 4, channel 5, and every time you turned the TV, there was a different TV station. Well, they were all over-the-air TV stations, and up on Montesano Mountain, which is the highest peak in North Alabama, was a tower that brought in the signals. It brought in 12 and 3 and 9 from Chattanooga. It brought in it was 8 at that time. Channel 8 became Channel 2 in Nashville, but wrestling was on Channel 8 on Murfreesboro Road. Nick Gulas on Saturday night at 10:30. You had Channel 42 in Birmingham. You'd have 4 and 5 out of Nashville as well. So you had 8, 4, and 5. You had 42 out of Birmingham, and Channel 6 and Channel 13. And Channel 13 would flip during the day. They would be WHBQ TV out of Memphis on my cable and or my TV. And at night, it would be Channel 13 out of Birmingham, WAPI. And I don't know why, but it did. So with that, I could watch wrestling at 10 o'clock in the morning, I believe it was, or 11 o'clock in the morning on Channel 12 with Harry Thornton. I could watch Grady Reeves at 4 o'clock here in Huntsville. I could watch at that time, and I want to say Channel 13 in Memphis had wrestling on at like 2 or 2:30 in the afternoon. I could watch Lance Russell and Dave Brown in Memphis. Then I could turn around and watch the Channel 42 TV that night or the Channel 8 TV that night. So I would see wrestlers, and they'd be in Chattanooga or Huntsville, and then they'd be in Birmingham, or they'd be in Memphis, and then that night they'd be in Nashville. And somebody would have gotten juice in Memphis, and they're back in Tennessee, and there's no, and all of a sudden I'm saying, wait a second, there's something going on here. And you'd see a Wild Melee on Channel 12, and they'd go down to Birmingham on Channel 2 or Channel 42 that night, and with Sterling Brewer, the commentator, and they would do the same angle that I saw them do on Chattanooga TV with Harry Thornton in Birmingham that night. And this was before the bicycling of one tape went around the whole territory. And so I really got sort of smarted up before I ever got to college. And then I followed it in college because it was at the Hippodrome, which was half a block from Vanderbilt, where I went to school. And then when the Hippodrome burned, they put it over at Father Ryan High School, which was a half a block the other way. And then before they moved to Nashville in the Fairgrounds Arena. And so I sort of got an idea of it, and that's how I got interested in it. And then when you're watching commentators like Harry Thornton and Grady Reeves and Sterling Brewer and Smiling Jack Simpson and Jack Green and Lance and Dave, and you're learning the holes and you're seeing and what they call and how they call. I had the greatest education in the world to be a wrestling announcer. So when I got to actually do it, people said, wow, you know what you're doing. I don't look like a wrestler. I've never, like I said, never been a wrestler, but I knew it from watching it. So my thanks to all those teachers.
Now, is it true they did not smarten you up before you did commentary?
And when I worked for Jerry Lawler for those 4 weeks for Jerry, he sort of let me know what to say, but meetings. Nick Gulas smarted me up the second night I worked for him. The first night I worked for him, he asked me, I'd met George at one of our radio promotions for Kicks 104. And George and I got to talking, and he said, come out to the fairgrounds Wednesday night. He said, we'll let you do some ring announcing. So I came out, and they put me in the ring. I did the ring announcing and, gave it a little flair or whatever. And then after the ring announcing, the second week, I came back, and they had Tom Renesto doing the commentary for Nick. Had Tom Renesto doing the commentary. Tom was a brilliant man and a better wrestler than commentator. And so anyway, that second week, they did a thing, and I'm sitting at ringside with the bell, and I had a headset on, and every now and then Tom would ask me a question. I'd say something. And then all of a sudden, I forget who it was at the time, but they come out. I think it was Al Green, and they grabbed Tom Renesto and threw him in the ring. And the match is going on, and Nick comes over, and he taps me on the shoulder, and he said, go, talk. And I started talking. Well, I had no idea this was all coming up or going on. Well, obviously he must have liked something, because after the show, he said, I want you to come in the office Friday. He said, I want to talk to you about something. I said, okay. So his office was down on 8th Avenue in Nashville. So I came in on Friday and got there and sat down, and he closed the office. I'll never forget this. He had a guy named Tommy Kirklees working for him. And George was in the office, and he looked at him and he said, get out. And I'm like sitting there, and Nick has just told these two guys to get out. And I'm like, oh, Jesus, here's, what's coming next. He looks at me, and he comes over the table, and you got to know Nick, because he sat behind that desk. He comes over the table, and he says, boy, he said, I'm going to tell you something right now, and you better not tell anybody, not even your wife. And if I hear you've told anybody, I will kill you. And he opened his drawer, and there's a pistol in the drawer. I thought he was pretty serious. So he told me, he said, okay, this is how it goes. And so I went, okay. And he says, you don't tell us all. I said, I won't tell us all. And from that day forward, he entrusted me. And I think I got this out of my dad, because my dad worked in World War II on chemical warfare and biological warfare. So he had to keep secrets. I'd never told a soul. And until it all actually came out, and everybody sort of in the last 15, 20 years, I haven't really talked about it, because I'm afraid Nick Gulas will jump out of the grave and kill me.
Now, Jack, you wasn't smart the first match you had, were you?
Well, I started setting up rings and stuff when I was 16 years old, and they cafe'd me pretty well, although I caught on to a lot of stuff. But nobody actually ever just said, this is a work. And the first match I had, the promoter came to me, and he said, you see that guy in the ring? And the guy that I was wrestling was already in the ring. And I said, yeah. And I was nervous. If I hadn't had a mask on, I think my chin would have beat my chest to death. I was so nervous. And he said, I want you to go out there and beat him up. And I said, you want me to beat him up? And he said, yeah, I'll just go out there and beat him up. So I went out there and beat him up. And that was on a Thursday night. The next night I wrestled the same guy. I beat him up, because that's what I was told to do. On Saturday night, we were at a place, and the guy, I was out back taking a leak, and the guy comes walking around the corner, and he says, hey man, can I talk to you? And I said, sure. And he said, are you smart? And of course I didn't even know what that meant. I thought, are you calling me dumb? and he said, wait a minute, because I was a lot bigger than him. He said, look, man, he said, I'm going to let you beat me up. You don't really have to beat me up. He said, if you'll just listen to me out there, I'll make you look good. I promise. I said, okay. Well, come to find out, that was the promoter's cousin who he hated, and he wanted him beat up anyway. So I was just his instrument. But now after that, I was okay. But, I was in that shadow world. I thought it was a work, but nobody told me for sure.
And I got to say, there are a lot of people, there's a lot of stories about Nick Gulas, and a lot of them are not very nice about him. But Nick Gulas was, to me, and I know a lot of boys, maybe not, but Nick either liked you or he didn't like you. Yeah. And Brett, I think your dad is a perfect example. He loved your dad. I mean, Nick thought the world of your dad. And I had an episode that happened with Nick that I have told only once before. And actually, I have two quick stories. But the first one is my daughter was born in 1979. I had a son born in 75. And he'd come to the wrestling matches. And Mr. Nick would always, he loved kids. And he would take my son, take him to the back. If he was with Nick, we knew. 1979, my daughter was born, and my wife had a C-section, and it was at Nashville Memorial Hospital. And at that time, I wasn't making a lot of money in the radio business, and it was expensive to go in the hospital. And we had insurance, and it wasn't great insurance. It was, and I ended up owing $1,200 to Nashville Memorial Hospital. And I was a week or two afterwards. We were after a Wednesday night show. I was getting ready, and Mr. Gulas was always prompt to pay you. He'd either pay you right as soon as the matches were over, or he'd come up during the main event. And he'd open your jacket and stick it down in your pocket. And I finished the match, and George was he had been in the match, and it was getting ready. We were getting ready to go home. And George says, you okay? Everything okay? I said, yeah. I said, I'm okay. I said, I'm just having, I'm having to save up money. I said, I've got to pay my hospital bill for the baby. I said, I got to get it paid out. And I'd worked out a deal where I was going to pay the hospital $100 a month for the next 12 months. Well, this was on a Wednesday night. Thursday afternoon, I get a call. We'd done the promos tape. We taped the promos after the Wednesday night show at Channel 5 at 1:00 on Thursday afternoon. And I got a call Thursday. Actually, it was before the taping. And Mr. Gulas said, it was him. He said, hey kid, you coming to do the promos? I said, yes, sir. I'll be there on time. He said, okay. He said, I need to talk to you afterwards. I said, okay. So after the promos at Channel 5 got finished, he said, I need you to come down to the office. Well, when Mr. Nick asked you to come down to the office, there was it's either a good thing or a bad thing. That's nothing in between. He ain't asking you to come down there, have a cup of coffee and read the paper. So I figured, well, he's going to tell me that I've done something wrong, or I need to do something this or whatever. So I get down to his office, and I walk in behind him. He closed the door, and he shuts his office door, and he says, sit down. I want to talk to you about something. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I haven't been fooling with any ring rats, and I haven't stolen any money. And, I think I'm okay. So I sit down, and he says, I want you to answer this question truthfully to me. He looked me dead in the eye. He said, do you owe anybody any money? And I looked at him, and I said, well, kind of not really. I got a hospital bill I got to pay for the baby because the insurance didn't take care of everything. I said, but no, I'm good, Mr. Nick. He looked at me and he said, how much is that bill? I looked at him and I said, well, I've got to pay him, paying him $100 a month. It's $1,200, but I'm, paying him $100 a month, and I'm taking care of it. I'm good. He looked at me and he reached into his desk again. And Brett, you'll understand this. And Jack, you probably heard the story or seen it. He pulls out a wad of $100 bills that I think some of them may have had mold on them, because the ones they look like a small bale of cotton, a small round bale of cotton. And he takes that rubber band off of that thing, and he goes 12 times, and he pushes it over. And he said, go pay your bill right now. And I looked at him, I said, well, Mr. Nick, I can't take your money. I said, I'll pay you back. He said, no. He said, go pay your bill. Did I tell you to go pay your bill? I said, yes, sir. He said, go pay your bill. He said, don't worry, we'll work something out. I never once had to pay the man back a dime. Never once. And I came to him several times, and came to him with my wife one time and said, Mr. Nick, we want to pay you back for what you did. He said, you've done more than you know you've done. Don't worry about it. And I said, well, I'm going to pay you back. And he said, don't worry about it. And that was always his answer. So people will tell you bad stories about Nick Gulas, but I'll tell you a good story about Nick Gulas. And the second time is I was coming down to Chattanooga. Harry Thornton had his heart attack, and I was doing the TV show live from Channel 12 for 6 or 7 weeks. And I would ride down with Mr. Gulas on I-24 from Nashville to Chattanooga. And he would ride I-24, not in the right-hand lane or in the left-hand lane. And Brett, your dad could testify to this, and you probably could too. When you rode I-24, you rode the middle of the road. The middle of the car straddled the white line. You and every police officer, every state trooper, every city officer between Nashville and Chattanooga knew his car. They knew when that Lincoln was coming through at 90 miles an hour, it was Nick Gulas. And in riding with him, we got stopped twice the whole time I worked for him. And both times, one time the officer was stopping him to warn him that there'd been an accident up ahead and he needed to get off the road. And the second time, an officer wanted tickets to an event for his granddaughter so he could bring his granddaughter to an event in Manchester. So they knew Mr. Gulas. But the story is, we're in there, and I was talking, there was a big heavyweight championship boxing match between Ali and I want to say it was Foreman. And we started talking about it. Looked at me, 90 miles an hour down the road. He turns and he looks at me and he says, boxing is a work. And I looked at him and I said, no, sir, I don't. And he said, Michael, he said, it's not like wrestling where everybody has their job. He says, it's the big money thing that involves the TV, that involves the cable companies, that involves what was just starting out as pay-per-view. He says, they're going to work it to where they're going to build the biggest match to get the most money. And they may not tell you how the finish is going to be like we do, but they're going to tell you who's going to win the match or who's going to win the boxing match. And until this day, I 100%, especially after this past Saturday night with Fury and Deontay Wilder, I totally believe it, because I think the work is in to get Fury against Joshua for a big event in Wembley Stadium in London for $100 million, and then come back with whoever's got the belt, either Joshua or probably Fury, and bring back, and then you have a rematch against Wilder for even more bigger money in a bigger venue. But right. I wanted to share those two stories because they both really come to play, I think, in what we're talking about.
Did you ever meet Nick Gulas, Jack?
I sure did. He was really, really nice to me. I never worked for him, but I met him.
Yeah, Nick was a good guy. When Dad had worked. He went in 1972. He went to Atlanta. And actually, he actually went, and Tom Ernesto was booking. So he went with Tom Ernesto from the Mid-Atlantic territory. They were working as the Bolos, him and Larry Hamilton. So they went to Atlanta, and a couple of times Atlanta would send talent to Chattanooga. And so we would go to the matches, and then we got to know Nick. And so when Dad wasn't going to come to Chattanooga, he would call my dad up and say, does the boys want to come to the matches? You just tell them, come on. And we actually went a couple of times and went to the matches, and Nick was very nice to us. So we can't say nothing bad. Now, did Dad get some bad payoffs from Nick Gulas? Yeah, he did. But, Dad was a younger person. He was taking the ring. He was 16 years old, so I guess he thought, hey, I can get away with this with a kid, because he didn't do that with everybody. But I remember one of the biggest things, Dad, when he was booking Chattanooga for a while, he had a big Nick Gulas memorial show. Not a memorial show, but they were just showing the respect to Nick Gulas. And they had George was on the show, Tojo, Crazy Luke Graham, a bunch of the older guys. Dad brought them in, had elimination. And Nick always would say this to us: I started your daddy. Which he did have a part in it, but it was really Jimmy Dykes that started my dad. But he'd always say that. So on that show that night, we come up and he wants to see us, and he actually hugged us, which I was very surprised about that. But when he looked at us, he said, I will never forget this day. He had a tear in his eye, and he said, I love your daddy. Nick was really a good person, but he was a businessman first, and he looked up to the wrestling business, and he was the bad guy to the Welches. So Nick Gulas was the bad guy.
Well,
don't you think he was the bad guy to the other guys?
Yeah, and let me say this too. For as much of a businessman, and you're absolutely right, he was a businessman, and he respected the business probably as much as anybody I've ever known. I really felt like his undoing was when he softened up his business side and pushed George. Not that George, and I'm not so sure, and knowing George over the years and having worked with him on some other projects besides wrestling, I'm not so sure that George really wanted to be that wrestler. I don't know if George really wanted to be a Jeff Jarrett or a Greg Gagne or a Bob Orton Jr. or Randy Orton kind of. I don't know if he really wanted that, but I think he was doing that because I think his dad wanted him to be successful, and he knew that if he was controlling the wrestling side of that he could, quote unquote, make George successful. And I think that was part of his undoing, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that plus for some reason the George Gulas thing just caused so much problems for Nick all the way around. The breakup with Jarrett. It just and I think it probably really hurt Nick Gulas really bad when the NWA actually took Jerry Jarrett's side on that. You would think they wouldn't have done that, but they did. They did take Jerry Jarrett's side, and that had to weigh heavy on. But after that, really, Nick had a hard time getting talent after that for some reason.
Well, I programmed radio stations. I managed stations in St. Louis in 1992, and then back again from from late 95 through 97. And I had an honor of I had a friend in the record business that was friends with Pat O'Connor, who, of course, were friends with Sam Munchnick. And in 1996, I got to sit down. I think it was 96, may have been late 95. I had lunch with Sam Munchnick. And it was three of us, and the gentleman from Columbia Records and myself and Sam, and it was arranged that, and we met at Sam's favorite little restaurant over in Clayton, and it was a little meat and three place. And he walked in, and he was using his walking stick. His son was a very successful doctor in St. Louis, and he sat down and we got to talking, and then we were there for about an hour and a half, and then he asked me to come over to his condo. He said, I want to show you some things. And his condo, he was a pack rat. You got to remember, Sam Munchnick was a newspaper man. He was the beat writer for the St. Louis Browns. But when they moved to Baltimore and became the Orioles, he wouldn't move. He stayed in St. Louis. And a guy, I don't know if it was Tutzman, one of the promoters out of Chicago, got him to help him promote wrestling in St. Louis. And Sam found out about the business. And as a sports writer, he said he saw that you can make money at this. And he went to the guy and he said, you know what? You either give me St. Louis to run on my own, or I'm going to write an article in the Globe Democrat and I'm going to expose your business. And he admitted to that. And so the guy, I'm not going to expose my business and whatever. So Sam got St. Louis and then became the president and used the same tactics with the 31 other promoters nationwide to say, if we don't all work together, I'm going to tell everybody that this is a big ruse. And so he was a politician in that era. But the man, and I brought up the Nick Gulas situation with him in the conversation, and believe it or not, and this is from the words of the late great Sam Munchnick, and I will testify to this, the rub that started between him and Mr. Nick it wasn't a Jerry Jarrett rub at all. It was a rub that the champion, and I want to say it was Harley, came to Nashville and worked the territory for a week. As back in the days, as you guys know, the champion would come to your territory 1 week out of the year and work your towns, and you put him over and all that. But Sam Munchnick said to me that the problem arose not because of George or because of Jerry Jarrett or any of that, but over the payoff and the money that was guaranteed to Harley. And it got they got crossways on it, and Sam just blew him off. And about that time, within the next few months, Jerry Jarrett broke off in Memphis because of the the Welch family connection, broke off Memphis. And Sam said, I ain't going to support that so-and-so, and sent Harley to Memphis to wrestle. I think it was Harley at the time, sent Harley to wrestle Memphis for Jerry Jarrett. And that was like putting the NWA crown from one of your people onto this new promotion. And that's how that was the story Sam Munchenick told me.
Wow.
All right. Well, it looks like we're about it's 8:30. So I think we'll call it a show. Michael, thank you so much for coming on here, talking about the Georgia Championship Wrestling Superstars. I do want to have you on because I do want to talk about Nick Gulas a little further. Nick Gulas, I think he's a forgotten promoter. And I think we need to keep his name out there and let the people know who Nick Gulas is, because Nick Gulas was a very important part of professional wrestling, and the history of Nick Gulas, especially in Chattanooga, Nashville, the whole Birmingham area. I think we've got to keep that alive, and I'd like to bring you back and talk about him in depth.
I'd be honored with that. And Jack, I appreciate you being around. I mean, I've had a lot of respect for you for many years, and it's great seeing you. I will tease that if you don't mind. I will tease that with something. And then when you do the show, I'll go into details. Nick Gulas did more for integration in the state of Alabama. Nick Gulas and Bear Bryant did more for integration in the state of Alabama. It's been documented. Alabama Southern Cal in 1970, 1969, coming to Alabama, 1969, the University of Alabama with all white players that caused sports and i.e. football to be integrated in the state of Alabama. Everybody knows that story. But about that same time, there was an incident that occurred on Channel 42. And Brett, your dad's very aware of this because we've talked about this, that did as much to help stem segregation and bring the real world together as the Alabama game did, but with an entirely different audience. So I'll just leave that as a tease.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Michael, so much. And thank you so much. And we will talk to you about Nick Gulas on our future show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brett. Jack, great seeing you again, sir.
Great to see you, brother.
All right, Jack, next week, we will come back and the controversy will begin. I don't know if you kept when I did the top 100 wrestlers of all time.
Followed right along.
I made a lot of people mad. Put some people in there. Put some people in there that didn't like. So starting next week, 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, we will talk about the top 100, and we'll start at the 100 that I had was Brad Armstrong. And we'll bring in a bunch of guests. We'll just leave it open, and we'll bring some guests in as long as they keep it clean, no profanity on this program. Right. And let them come on, and we'll let everybody starting next week pick their top 100.
Yeah. Hey, just a quick update on Pat Rose. I messaged with him while we were on, and he was just having a lot of trouble getting logged in. He just couldn't get it figured out. He's great with bait and the hook. Cheap plug there, buddy. But hopefully we can get him straightened out on here in the future.
I may just have to bring him to the house.
Hey, road trip.
I may just have to bring him here so he don't have to figure out how to get on there. And also, I seen Alan Moore. Alan Moore must have been busy tonight. He didn't get to come on as well, but that's all right. We had a good conversation with Michael St. John. A lot of information I never knew. But I'm looking forward to the controversy because we're going to make a lot of controversy. There's going to be a lot of upset people next week. But they're going to get the pick. I gave them the opportunity. I just couldn't figure out. I told everybody, I said, I'm going to do this top 100. I'm going to let you vote for it. I just couldn't figure out how to do it. And I figured this is going to be the best way to do it. Let the people they can just make a comment each week. Oh, by the way, there's a lady. I don't know if you know this person. Do you know a crazy lady?
I'm sure I do.
It says this is Tanja. So she said hello to you a couple of times.
Hey, back.
But anyway, we'll do that. We'll do that next week. Thank you so much, Jack, for being part of the show. And we will talk wrestling each and every week. Let's keep the history alive. Let's make wrestling great again. I don't know what that meant. But anyway, but we will talk to everybody next week. It's going to be next week, 7:30. Join us. Jack Lord will be back with us. We'll also have Mitch Lucas will be here. He knows a lot about Brad Armstrong, and we'll talk about Brad, and we'll see what your pick is going to be for Top 100, the Top 100 Wrestler. Thanks, everybody, for being a part, and we'll see you next week.